the Overman Warrior Podcast.
Hi, Rich Hoffman here. So it's a fascinating topic. I love the story. But when we talk about how things are hidden in plain sight and how things work in the world, how do authority figures prevent investigations into a truth? So if you're in a position of authority and you want to suppress, gaslight any inquiry into what you're doing, when you're in the authority position, you can abuse those rights. I think a great example, if you ever seen the David Lynch movie Fire Walk with Me, I think it's one of the scariest movies I've ever seen. I think it's the Twin Peaks series. It's the prequel to the Twin Peaks shows. Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me, when Laura Palmer's dad had been molesting her, and they're at the dinner table. The mom knows about it, but the mom doesn't want to shake up her world. She has a status in the community. She doesn't want to mess up her marriage with her husband. And she doesn't want to address the hard thing with her daughter, so she ignores that it's going on. So when the daughter had caught her father in her room, and she's got this kind of schizophrenic thing going on to hide the fact from herself, because she can't deal with the fact that her dad is doing that to her. So she has to create this alter ego persona. And to get even deeper than that, the persona actually is an attribute of the spirit world that encompasses her father's body. That's a whole other thing. So spirits jumping in and out of bodies and possessing him and getting him to do all kinds of things, living through them. And there's a lot going on there. But anyway, the father knows that he does this to his daughter. He may regret it. He may not have power and over his mind to stop himself from doing it because he's possessed or whatever you want to call it. Still, it's up to him to not let it happen. And he's molesting his daughter. She knows about it. She confronts him. She sees him in her room. So later that night at dinner, in front of the mother, she confronts father. Why were you in my room? And he can't answer the question. So he says, why are your hands dirty? Why did you come to dinner with your hands dirty? And he plays the authority and superimposes her inquiry with an authority thought that transposes the circumstance. And it's a over-the-top example. David Lynch was always good at that. He had similar kinds of explorations in a character drama, sexually based. The movie Blue Velvet, very similar kinds of things, where the dark side of personalities hide the facade behind a very beautiful facade, but just behind the curtain is a lot of nasty, dark stuff going on. And they hide it, they gaslight, and they do all kinds of psychological mechanisms to keep you from asking about it. And so that brings up, and there's all kinds of conspiracies on like the role that the Jewish people have and how they manipulate the world and how much power they have. And there's endless conspiracies about it. And it's related to what all this authority concealment of the truth that we've been dealing with, that I would argue has broken down since COVID occurred, and those authority figures lost their trust. They kind of had their Laura Palmer moment where they're asking their dad at the dinner table, the society is, and they're asking their parental government, communist government, socialist governments, deep state that's taken over, accountable government, which is in the United States. We have all kinds of power structures that have been at work in the background doing all kinds of bad stuff. And through elections, we've been confronting them with the truth. And you got election fraud and all kinds of things going on. People have lost trust with that parental figure because we caught them doing bad things. And COVID, I say, is the breaking point, because governments all over the world lied to us, told us things we know weren't true. And now time and history has proven that to be the case. So I think one of the most obvious accountable circumstances going on in the world right now, and I'm interested in it because I think the politics of the Temple Mount is a very fascinating thing to watch. The Jewish people want their temple back. They want to rebuild the third temple. They're making preparations for it right now. And, of course, Islam claims it. It's where Muhammad flew a magic animal from Mecca and flew to that spot where the Dome of the Rock is and then ascended into heaven on a magical night. That's what they think. And, of course, Christians revere that as Jesus was Jewish and he went to the temple and taught, and everybody has some claim to that area around the Temple Mount. And of course, that's the centerpiece of all the Old Testament action. It's where Abraham was sacrificing his son Isaac. So a lot of claims to that piece of real estate. So I'm always interested in the politics of it. And I'll say this much: everybody wants to know why after Israel won the dome back, but they ceded it to Islam. They let Islam run the Temple Mount. Why would they do that? Why? They have control of everything else, and they could have pushed them off after they took possession as the country of Israel. They didn't have to let the Muslims control the Dome of the Rock. They could have taken over a long time ago, and they're making moves now to do so. And really, what's been going on behind the October attack, that is, as everybody in the news, and all the hostages in the Gaza Strip, the politics of the Gaza Strip, it really all comes down to preserving who controls the Temple Mount. And the Jewish people are making moves. They have the red heifers. They have all they're making plans to rebuild the temple for the third time. And the Muslim people know that, and that's what provoked the raids on that occurred that October a couple of years ago. That was so devastating and terrifying for so many people. That's the incident that was looming in the background. It really comes down to this Temple Mount fight and who runs it and controls it. So I've said all along, and the Ark of the Covenant's important because it's what carried the Ten Commandments and kind of was the foundation of rule of law, and created the idea of Western civilization, and not just from Jewish law, but how Christianity perpetuated into what became Christianized Europe after the fall of the Roman Empire. So the Ark of the Covenant, I've always said, I think, is probably in Ethiopia. I think that they think they have it, but there may be lots of copies of Arks of the Covenant. Egyptians were making very, very similar things, and there's lots of like items like the Ark of the Covenant all over the place. It's a very popular ritual in that part of the world, especially in Ethiopia. And I think they have the Ark of the Covenant. And for years, I've thought that that's where it actually went. But listening to modern Jewish people who are trying to rebuild the temple, they're claiming that the Ark is well hidden, and they know where it's at, and they're going to retrieve it at the right time. So that makes me think there's new information there that maybe the Ark in Ethiopia may not be the authentic Ark, and that Solomon may have sent it with his son back to Ethiopia for the Queen of Sheba to appease her. It may have just been a fake, like a fake Rolex, to make a lover feel cared for, and you sent that back with the son to show unification, but the real one dedicated to the real God of the pantheon of gods that his wives worshipped. They might have actually hid it and passed it down through Jewish law and exactly where they did hide it. Because here's the thing. There's a lot of caves and tunnels, a lot more than people understand, that are under the Temple Mount. And when those started to get discovered by many adventurers at the turn of the last century, I think that was a problem for the Kabbalah anyway, to keep it concealed, because now people have discovered all these tunnels and where the Well of Souls is underneath the Temple Mount. And you got the whole world wanting to do archaeology and dig it all up. And they want to make sure it doesn't end up in a museum. It doesn't end up like in the movie Raiders of the Lost Ark. It doesn't turn out to be a big global spectacle. They want the Ark in their temple. They want to resurrect the temple, and seeing the plans that they're making about it, and then their confident proclamations that the Ark is well hidden and they know where it's at, points to the fact that the strong evidence is that it's buried under the Temple Mount. So how do you keep people from then uncovering it? Well, this is where the conspiracies come from. And this is back to the Laura Palmer. How do you conceal a sin? How do you conceal a secret? How do you keep a secret? Through intimidation, through making an enemy of your enemy be your friend, using antagonisms or a power aspect of the relationship to manipulate somebody who is gullible or wants to be trusting, and to use that trust against them. I think that the reason that the Jewish people allowed Islam to occupy the Temple Mount is to conceal the archaeology on the Temple Mount and use a hostile force, and where Islam is very hostile to who controls the Temple Mount, has been for years, but only recently have a lot of those harsh restrictions been relaxed, and the aggression to push towards regaining control of the Temple Mount is now at a pretty fever pitch. And then the statements they have about the Ark of the Covenant being well hidden, and they know where it's at. And now these tunnels, people are putting little drones down in them. Josh Gates did, not that long ago, I like Josh Gates, did a segment on going down to that tunnel, and they went as far as they could to where it collapsed. There's a lot of tunnels under there, and people say they were irrigation tunnels dug out over time to get water into the temple area. But I would profess that probably Zechariah Ascension, even though everybody thought he was a kook, I think he was onto something when he said that there was pre-archaeology there before David ever bought the threshing floor, and it was there before God told Abraham to sacrifice Isaac there. And then that was a spot where three major religions launched that really kind of occupy a lot of what's going on in the world. It's not a coincidence, all those spots. And so how do you control and keep something that's hidden for thousands of years, concealed as a treasure of the temple that was well hidden, so that all the Roman occupiers would never find it, and all the heathens over time couldn't find it, and under lots of years of Islamic occupation wouldn't find it. But now you have a lot of modern archaeologists that would love to get in there and dig and dig and dig and explore those tunnels and all the caves underneath. And, they have the ability to move a few rocks out of the way to get to whatever's hidden, well hidden. So how do you stop that from happening? Well, you cause a condition that keeps anybody from getting a permit to go dig. You keep it hostile, and the best way to do that is allow Muslims to control the Temple Mount. Give them rights to the temple, create a condition where people feel, the Jewish people feel shoved aside and confined to the Wailing Wall, and build up a market for a retaking of the Temple Mount to build the third temple and get the world to rally to your cause. Now, if you want to call that Jewish conspiracy, I tend to like Jewish people. I like the Old Testament. I like a lot of attributes of the biblical context of their Hebrew history. And then I also like that Jesus was a Jewish person that was sent to redeem mankind of their sins and close a loop started by Adam's fall from grace. So those are great concepts, all that. But it does center around this Temple Mount. And knowing all that, and members of the Kabbalah who would, through oral tradition, passed down through time, just like the Dead Sea Scrolls were preserved and hidden. And I've talked about the contents of the Copper Scroll and the contents of that treasure hunt on that scroll are probably long looted and likely started a lot of the economies in the Near East to be, get a foothold, some seed funding to start their oil business, because there are a lot of regions of the world that have a lot of natural resources under their feet, and they can't polish a rock to sell it at a flea market. It takes a little bit to get to where you can make a mass market enterprise and become part of a global trade network. But all those treasures seem to be long gone. But passed down through the Kabbalah and the mystery schools of various kinds, that the Ark would be well hidden in those caves, in those tunnels, and that those tunnels started to get a lot of traction at the end of the previous century. Going into the 20th century, there's a lot of explorers that started climbing around in those tunnels. And the best way to put a stop to that is to have a hostile force that creates a situation where people can't go do any research and they can't go digging around. They certainly can't go find the Ark. So you hide it under a group of people that don't want to dig and find anything, because Islam doesn't want, they want to take the Quran and overlay it over the biblical text. They want to supersede it. So they don't want to validate biblical archaeology. They don't want biblical archaeology to invalidate their claims on the Temple Mount. So they're not advocated to go dig anything anywhere. And of course, others are inclined to provide biblical testimony through science by doing real archaeology in the region. And how do you keep them from digging around those tunnels? Let Islam bring hostilities to the area and let them possess it. They're not motivated to dig, and they'll do all the work of keeping everybody out. And it's been able to preserve a secret in the modern age. But I think that secret's about to go the other way, because the Jewish people are about to pull out their card of claim, and they're going to take the Temple Mount and they're going to reclaim the Ark and put it back in the Holy of Holies. And that's their plan. From the Kabbalah perspective, not something they talk about on the nightly news, but that's what I think they're doing. And you see how these conspiracies percolate, whether it's UFOs, whether it's the Temple Mount, whether it's Bigfoot, or think of any other cryptid that's running around out there to kind of hide unaccountable government that's up to no good, and they hide it behind these fearful circumstances that are propped up all over the world to conceal what the deep state, people who are part of an unaccountable government want to implement. That's how they keep their secrets secret and their motives going, and that's how they stay in power, through secrecy. And it goes back, the best example to analyze, I think David Lynch pinpointed it great in a couple of his films, Blue Velvet being one of them, but never better than in the Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me movie that gave the backstory to the television series. And I think that's why Muslims were allowed to occupy the Temple Mount, was to create enough hostility to prevent examination. I recently talked about the Kandahar giant in Afghanistan. Why can't we win in Afghanistan? Why can't nobody? The Soviet Union tried to do it for years. We've tried to do it. You have these long 20-year wars that never stop. Why? Why do wars never stop? Why is Iran and Iraq, why do these places have so much trouble? And again, there's a lot of talk about the whole Iraq war was about obtaining the DNA remains of Gilgamesh in the Baghdad Museum. That's what they say. So you create a war over oil or resources, or, Saddam Hussein was claiming himself to be the next Nebuchadnezzar. He literally did that. Why do we allow Iran to fester behind communism? Why do we allow China to have communism so that no one does any research in those mountains of all those pyramids that they have in the remote regions that are covered by dirt that needs some excavation, just like Teotihuacan in Mexico is covered. They're all over the place in China, but you can't do any digging there because an authoritarian government is in charge. And my contention is, just like the Jewish people are likely doing for their own sake of history, their own claims to the land, but just like they're doing by hiding a secret, which probably the Ark of the Covenant is hidden in those tunnels under the Temple Mount, they're using the radical Islam to conceal the secret, which is their enemy, but it's their friend because it keeps people from finding out the truth that they're trying to keep concealed. And I think you find that's happening all over the world right now, in many places where it's war-torn or overtly communist. The authoritarian governments that don't want to dig, don't want to do anything bad, the authority figures were propped up by these actors of these mystery schools to provoke war. It's why when you go to the Skull and Bone Society, which George Bush was a member of, Skull and Bone Society on their mantle over the fireplace says war, because you use war to control the narrative. So anywhere where you see war, you see a narrative being controlled. You have basically Laura Palmer's dad, who's molesting her, trying to keep it a secret by yelling at her about washing her hands. And you get people off the topic long enough to conceal the secret. But it's all coming to unravel because we live in an age where people are talking about these things. And because of COVID, they no longer believe these authority figures. And that's a good thing. That's why we're in the age of disclosure and these secrets are no longer being hidden. And I think if you're a member of the Kabbalah and you're trying to keep these secrets hid, why are they making the move now? Why is now the time of revelation? Is this the end of times that a lot of people have been talking about? Why now for the third temple? And I think it's because everything's fallen apart on the narrative. The authority figures that have been in control are losing their ability to do so. Whether it's the aliens, whether it's Bigfoot, whether it's ghosts, whether it's the Ark of the Covenant under the Temple Mount, hidden in those caves, tunnels that have been there probably before David bought the threshing floor. That's why Yahweh was so specific about having a sacrifice at that spot. It's coming unraveled, and they do it now, or they're going to lose their ability to control the situation. And I think that's what we're seeing, and that's why the move to rebuild the temple now is happening. And I think that's also why there's renewed interest in the Ark of the Covenant, and they made proclamations that hey, it's under our control, we know where it's at, and we're justified. We'll get it when we're ready, and we're building up to be able to do it. So it's very interesting times we're living in, but the primary issue of concern that you have to understand is how are conspiracies used to control a narrative that authority figures want to rule over other people. And I use the example from the Twin Peaks movie because it's a reference people can generally understand. It's pretty simple. Father's sexually abusing a daughter, and he's trying to conceal it from the world by yelling and screaming at her every time she tries to confront him about it. And the same thing happens with authority figures in governments and authoritarian governments all over the world, communist governments, communist regimes, which is really what's behind Iran. And sitting on top of all those regimes is exploration into archaeology. We all need to know. I mean, I'm all for sending archaeologists out, funding them. I'd even donate to a lot of their digs. But go out and dig and find out the truth and correspond the truth to scripture and text and apocryphal text that we have. Let's get to the truth. But when you're prevented from getting to the truth because the area has been stoked up to hostilities, then that's how you know there's more to the story, and there's more behind the conspiracies, where the authority figures are trying to hold power by scaring everybody to death with the conspiracy so they can maintain control over the truth, and they don't want anybody to find out what it is. But disclosure time is of this age, and thousands of years from now, we'll look back on it, and that's probably what we'll call it. All these conspiracies and mechanisms of destruction that have been looming in the background for thousands of years are coming unraveled before our faces, and it's a good thing. It's a really good thing, and I'm looking forward to it because there's a lot of earth-shattering revelations that we're going to get into in the months and years to come. I think we're going to find archaeology on Mars, and as the space programs rev up, we're going to get into a lot more interesting. We really need to solve some problems on Earth before we have to go solve problems that exist outside the planet that are going to rattle people to their cores. So now's a good time to get it all on the table and solve all these problems so as a human race we can survive this next phase intellectually. Anyway, it's Rich Hoffman here. Share, subscribe, make tomorrow a better day. If you haven't read my book, The Gunfighter's Guide to Business, I think you'll love it. Anyway, have a good day. And see you later.
Thank you for listening.